What's going on, everybody? Today we are breaking down all things about the 2025 Detroit Lions, including if our one true sun god, Amon-Ra St. Brown, is the safest first-round pick in all of fantasy football, if the ADP gap between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery is perhaps a bit too wide, is Jared Goff really someone worth pursuing considering he doesn't have really a rushing floor, all that and so much more on today's Fantasy Life show. But joining me, as always, to answer these ever-important questions, we do have Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, The Rock McFarland. Mr. Dwain, happy Monday as we record this, and happy Detroit Lions team preview day. First off, though, we are talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown. How do you feel about, again, his upside as someone who continues to go in the first round and as someone who continues to rack up fantasy points each and every season?
Yeah, I mean, your question of him being the most safe player in round one, it's kind of hard to argue against it. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's given us 18.5, 20.8, and 16.7 fantasy points per game. So that ranks 5th, 4th, and 11th. That's pretty consistent. I mean, I think if you wanted to nitpick it, you could say that, last year we did see things come down for St. Brown just a little bit. We've got the emergence of Sam LaPorta 2 years ago. And then last year, Jamo finally really became part of the offense. And when we look at it, we did have the targets per game slip back towards really where he was in 2022. So he had 8.7 targets per game last year. But we look at his receptions per game, it still hung in there at 6.6. It was still doing really well. And the reason why is he had an 83% catch rate. So if you look at his career or the 3 years before that, it was at a 77. So that could come down a little bit. And if Jamo or LaPorta really did take a step forward as a target earner, which is totally in the range of outcomes, these are two young players in their prime. I think we still have to consider them to be ascending talents. I think that's the path where suddenly we're oh, okay, Amon-Ra St. Brown should have been a high second round pick. But it's really hard for me to get behind any sort of narrative where it's anything more than that. So I'm very comfortable taking him at the end of round one. It's not like you got to take him where CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, those guys go. He goes more towards the end of round one rather than the beginning of round one. So yeah, I really love the price. Obviously, we love the Lions offense, Ian. I've got them projected for the second most passing yards per game at 260 and the third most passing touchdowns at 29. And despite being a little bit of a smaller guy, Amon-Ra, man, 10 and 12 touchdowns over the last 2 years. So a big part of what they do once they get down in the red zone.
Obviously has that mind meld chemistry going on with Jared Goff. Caught 30 consecutive targets at one point last season, longest such streak in the NFL since at least 2016. That said, Dwayne, we do have one minor injury to potentially worry about. Look, beat reporters, these NFL insiders, they got things like, NFL jerseys, turnouts, the new looks to actually worry about during the offseason. We also got to retweet the main account. So no one was going to be able to track Amon-Ra St. Brown undergoing a knee surgery, during the offseason. Again, just only so many hours in the day, Dwayne. We can't expect to get that sort of information. We did finally get it, though, in June. So it's being called, again, just a surgery to, quote, clean some stuff up, and Amon-Ra has been rehabbing it. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be an in-season issue. He is tentatively expected to be fully recovered by the time training camp starts in late July. But again, we are dealing with someone actively dealing with an injury to some extent. Is that enough of a tiebreaker for you when looking against, younger guys like Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors to go ahead and just take the guy who, again, didn't have a knee surgery this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key, that we're always talking about, right, is are you getting to buy any sort of dip? And Amon-Ra is really down only 0.2 picks over the last week. So it's not and really that news broke about 2 weeks ago. So it's not like there's this huge discount that we're getting to buy on Amon-Ra because of the injury. So I'm just I'm going, along with status quo right now. Obviously, if we get to training camp, and he's not on the field every week that lingers on, then that is something, to your point, you've talked a lot about over the last few seasons, and it has been a big issue, players entering the season with those injuries. We've got Cooper Kupp 2 years ago. That was a complete nightmare. We had it again. We had Jonathan Taylor 2 years ago. It was a holdout, but then obviously the injury was a concern. So I can't remember what JT's was, but we've had multiple. But back. Yeah, it was quote unquote back. But it really was a hold in. So maybe that's not the best one to mention, but JT did get off to a slow start that year. Obviously got hurt, and then we didn't see him for a while. So we want players to be healthy. But at the same time, really, even if I heard Amon-Ra wasn't practicing for the first 2 weeks of training camp, I'd probably drop him to early second round, mid second round. It'd be hard to drop him really further than that.
looking at our ranks over on fantasylife.com. I invite you guys to do the same when you're trying to, again, navigate the fantasy football world this offseason. But I'm a little bit lower than you with Amon-Ra overall. He's my 15th player. He is standing there at 12th for you. You do have Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors ahead of him, which I agree with. Looking at it more versus the running backs, though, Dwain, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, Devon H., and Derrick Henry, you do have Amon-Ra ranked ahead of those guys. So is that something where, again, it's close, maybe you're flipping it from draft to draft, or do you actively think that people, when they are at the end of that round one, go ahead and take Sun God ahead of these stud running backs?
Well, we're also talking about, I'm assuming, half PPR with 3 starting wide receivers. So that's the difference, right? If it's a 2 starting wide receiver league, then I think it's fine. You could move the running backs above Amon-Ra St. Brown. But anytime you go to a 3 wide receiver league plus a flex, because we know historically wide receivers are going to fill the flex, or they should fill your flex about 55% of the time once you get to the range of players that are going to be flex players, and you're already having to start 3. So if most of your flex spots are going to be filled by wide receivers and you're starting 3, there's just a supply and demand issue that also gets added on the wide receivers. So in those 3 wide receiver leagues, half PPR, full PPR, I do lean to Amon-Ra St. Brown over some of those running backs. Once you go to the two wide receiver sets, even if it's got a flex spot and it's half PPR, then I'm fine in that scenario, leaning more towards the running back. So I think it really just does come down to what's the scoring format and how many starters do you have to have based on the league that you're in.
Is there someone that you find yourself getting an overwhelming amount of exposure to at the end of round one? Because personally, I haven't been drafting a ton of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Not that I don't think he's worthy of being in this conversation, but for my money's worth, Nico Collins is that guy that I'm just continuously targeting, because I do think that his best case upside is finishing as the wide receiver 1. And, Dwayne, it's first or last, man. I'm shooting for the moon over here. So how often have you been going out of your way to actually draft Sun God in the best ball streets?
Well, look, man, here's the challenge with the end of round one is that it's a good challenge. There are multiple guys that I think can do what you just said. I think Malik Neighbors, we're a little bit more leery just because we don't know for sure about the quarterback situation, but I think you could say the same thing about Malik Neighbors. I do agree with you. I would lean slightly more to Nico Collins as far as if you told me which one is the bet to finish as the wide receiver 1 this year, just because we do like his quarterback better. But Brian Thomas Jr. is also in that conversation. So you got Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, and then you have this proven guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown. And while we sit here and say, okay, we can't really include Amon-Ra in this conversation of guys that could finish as the top guy overall. I mean, he's been 5th and 4th the last 2 years. So, I mean, all it takes is he catches a little bit more of an efficiency spike. One of these other players go down, they feed him a few more targets. Basically, if you had Amon-Ra St. Brown and his target numbers from 3 years ago in the version of the Lions offense that we're running now, you might have the wide receiver 1 overall. It'd kind of be like a Cooper Kupp situation. So I would never rule out Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I do agree with you. I think that Nico, I think that Brian Thomas Jr., and the reason why is these are the guys, right, that can really just break a touchdown from anywhere on the field. So they could get lucky and score 4 or 5 long ones. Plus, they could get 6 or 7 down inside the red zone. And so once you combine those two things together, I think it's just, it's a big advantage for those players. So their ceiling is higher from a yardage perspective and a touchdown perspective.
As Dwayne said, top 5 finishes in each of these past 2 years was the wide receiver 10 before that. So to answer our original question, if Amon-Ra is the safest first-round pick, if he's not, he is pretty freaking close. Again, this guy racks up fantasy points. You've certainly been sitting pretty in your fantasy leagues if you have been taking him on over these past few years. So, guys, next up, we're going to talk about the running backs in this ever high-scoring offense. First, though, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Dan Campbell's Lions offense always wants to establish the old run and pose their physicality on the opponent, and accordingly, both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery have been rather fantasy godsends over the past few seasons. Yes, Jahmyr Gibbs is the one getting the bulk of the press and the highlights and all that, and I understand why. The guy helped win a lot of fantasy championships down the stretch of last season. That said, Dwayne, you look at 2023, D-Mon came in as the RB31 in preseason ADP, finishes as the RB15. You look at 2024, he comes in as the RB21 in preseason ADP, finishes as the RB16. So keeping that cost in mind, which Lions running back do you think is, again, the best cost at their current ADP?
Well, I mean, It's so hard to say. Like, here's the thing. So, like, as Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously, you know, we know that he has this elite upside, like as a playmaker that David Montgomery just doesn't offer. David Montgomery is a really good player, but we're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs and what he does, like from a yards per carry, explosive rush rate, all those things. His explosive rush rate, so 10 plus yard carries or carries that went for 10 plus yards, 16 and 15% over the last 2 years. Look at his yards per carry, 5.7 and 5.2. Okay. I mean, Montgomery's still good though, 4.2 and 4.6 yards per carry. His explosive rush rate's more in line with the league average. The league average over the last 3 years for running backs is 9.5%. He's been at 9 and 10%. So literally right at the 9.5%. You can put those two numbers together for him. I think the real challenge is though, like what scenarios could play out here? And I think this is why we see Montgomery price so much lower. So I think these are the questions that you have to ask yourself. Technically, yes, Montgomery is the better buy based on what's happened the last 2 years. But are we so sure that's exactly what is going to happen for the Lions? Now, I think, you know, it's a good bet to think that they're going to continue to split up the backfield in a similar way. But if we had to ask these two questions, okay, who could take over more of the backfield this year without an injury? Who could force it? It's Gibbs, not Monty. Like, there's no scenario in the world where we suddenly think, man, they gave 60% to Monty and Gibbs was fully healthy. But we could see it with Gibbs. Like, we really, I mean, we're not saying it's going to happen, but like, there's a chance that they decide, you know, we need to give more touches to this dude. We love Monty, but we're probably wasting a few touches by not giving these to Gibbs. And then I think, you know, you have to ask the opposite question, like, right, who is more likely, you know, to just lose the touches, like not gain them? I mean, so it's the same question, but I think that it's Monty. So I think that's the issue, right? Gibbs is a player that would be more likely to be ascending. He's already shown he can do it, even if he doesn't get the full-time role. Whereas Monty really does depend on keeping the same exact role that he's had. He still needs to get the carries inside the 5-yard line, which are hugely valuable for the Rams. Even though they lost Frank Ragnow, they were already ready for it. They drafted a center in the second round this year. We'll see. Ragnow was one of the best centers in the league, so they may take a little hit on the offensive line, but still, we would expect a lot of rushing touchdowns this year from David Montgomery. But that really is his path to how he ultimately scores his fantasy points. And again, guys, that's not a knock on Montgomery. Scoring rushing touchdowns is a huge part for any running back's fantasy production. But when we look at Gibbs, I think that's the big part, right? We could actually see his role increase and we wouldn't be surprised. If we saw David Montgomery's role increase without a hit, without an injury to Gibbs, we would be surprised. Final thing, though. If Jahmyr Gibbs, knock on wood, we never want this to happen. I know I say this every time. People probably get tired of me saying that. Knock on wood, we never want this to happen. But if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss time, Monty would be in the top 6 running backs in our ranks, like immediately. So his contingent upside is massive. And if he does keep the same role that he's had, Ian, I could say this. We would probably look at a scenario where we thought we were getting too cute because, okay, right now we're taking Omarion Hampton over him. We're taking KW3 over him, so Kenneth Walker. We're taking RJ Harvey over him. We're taking Travion Henderson over him.
Don't put me in that group.
Okay, but ADP, everyone else is, right? So the market is taking all those players ahead of David Montgomery. So what do those guys have that David Montgomery doesn't have? It goes back to the question we said. They have a chance to take over their backfield. But on the flip side, like, those offenses aren't near as good as the Lions. And if they end up in part-time role, well, the Chargers might be, but if they end up in part-time roles like Monty's probably outscoring all those guys, right? So I mean, I totally get it. Like, I think that there is room that you could say that Monty should go like 5, 6, maybe even 7 picks higher as far as the running backs go.
You do look at it, man. 250 plus touch upside is on the table, even with a healthy version of Jahmyr Gibbs. And I am happy you brought up the contingent upside because I feel like everyone only talks about that with Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, yes, we saw it happen down the stretch last year. The overall RB1 when D-Mont is going to be out of the picture. But we did see 2 games actually in 2023 where it was Gibbs out of the picture. All Monty did was rack up 59 combined carries and targets, 270 total yards and 4 touchdowns. Good for PPR RB2 and RB5 finishes. So yes, Jahmyr Gibbs is better, but I also don't think Monty is just this goal line vulture who can't do anything else, man. Low key caught 36 balls for 341 receiving yards last year. I mean, that's more receiving fantasy points per game than guys like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, James Cook. Bucky Irving Dwayne, the great Bucky Irving averaged less than 0.1 PPR points more per game receiving than what D-Mont was able to do last season. So could they switch it? I guess, but I don't think they gave the dude a 2-year, $18 million extension last October to all of a sudden wind him out of the offense. So I do think that, again, in that low-end RB2 range, on a half PPR site too, man, like just we're betting on touchdowns, sure, but like we're betting on touchdowns and what should be one of the best offenses in the league with the guy we've seen do it. Hey, why not draft them both?
Yeah, I like them both. I will say on Monty last year, I feel like was pretty fluky as far as his receiving stuff. Like his targets per out run last year were nuts, 24%. If you look at him every year before, 14, 16, 17, 14, 14. So he's probably just due for regression in the passing game. So I do think that I agree with you, though. I think that I wasn't trying to just say that the only way he scores fantasy points is through the touchdowns, but that is like where his big part of his upside comes from, right? He is a guy that, like, would we be surprised at the end of the year, right, if he scored 14 rushing touchdowns, okay, and didn't catch near as many passes? Like, that's more the way I would project him, especially knowing that we've got Sam LaPorta, we've got Jameson Williams, and we already talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown to feed in the offense. So I do like both players. I agree with you. And actually, like, it's the most productive backfield in the league. It is one where you could draft both and you get value out of them every week. And if either one of them misses time, then you kind of just get it all consolidated to one back. So it is it's an interesting dynamic that we don't usually get. I think we could go back to probably like the Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram days where we saw some times like that, where you could really use both of those players, but really rare to find backfields like this where we can play both of these guys, still really feel good about both of them producing in the same week. And if one or the other went down, man, most of the work goes to the other guy.
Surely Jahmyr Gibbs must have averaged more yards per target than Montgomery, right? I mean, there's no chance that the opposite could be true. Oh, wait, it was. So I will not take this disrespect to David Montgomery's receiving capabilities, Mr. McFarland, but I hear you, Jahmyr Gibbs, pretty good in his own right. Have you been going out of your way to draft Gibbs, though, as this legit top 5 pick? Because, again, everyone seems to kind of be on the same page, Saquon, Bijan, then Jahmyr Gibbs, which is great, but, man, some really special receivers out there. So let's say you are on the clock in your home league, Dwayne. You're only drafting this one fantasy team this year, all right? Your wife has threatened to leave you in the dust if you have any more. So you get one shot, one opportunity, okay, to seize everything you've ever wanted in fantasy football land. What pick are you actually taking, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I've got Jahmyr Gibbs right now ranked as my 7th player. So I'm taking, and again, this is a 3 wide receiver league that we're talking about. So I'm doing what you said. Like, I'm taking Jamar Chase, I'm taking Justin Jefferson, I'm taking CeeDee Lamb, I'm taking those guys right now over Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think it really does come down, again, if it's a 2 wide receiver league, I'd be more willing to lean towards trying to, taking a swing on a Jahmyr Gibbs. And then, I know I don't have to worry as much about getting boxed out at the wide receiver spot. But, man, in 3 wide receiver leagues, I'm definitely taking the top 3 wide receivers on the board ahead of Gibbs. I think after that, I'm not going to force it with Puka Nacua. I'm probably taking Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm just going to go ahead and roll with it. Although that could easily be wrong with what Puka Nacua has done. Like, straight up, if David Montgomery keeps his role, Nakua's probably outscoring him this year, but at least we know he could also have a risk with Devontae Adams. So that's why I just chose to go ahead and keep Gibbs one spot ahead of Nakua.
That is where I'd Gibbs ranked as well. 6th player overall, someone you should again feel very comfortable taking in the early parts of round 1, because even last year, all right, like, yes, the stretch run was great, but even before D-Mont was even out of the picture, Gibbs was still the RB5 in terms of PPR points per game. So fantastic floor and ceiling combo from Gibbs, but you guys already knew that. So now let's actually try to toughen things up a little bit, Dwayne, and talk about 2 guys in this offense who are going to be a little bit cheaper, albeit maybe we don't have the same volume guarantees here. Of course, I'm talking about number 2 wide receiver Jameson Williams and tight end Sam LaPorta. So we'll start things off with J-Mo. Incredibly efficient season that he put together last year. I mean, you talk about guys who have actually been able to gain over 1,000 receiving yards on under 100 targets. And yeah, Jameson Williams is now one of those guys. Joins A.J. Brown, Mike Williams. I think Deshaun Jackson got there back in the day. Mike Williams, George Kittle, some other names in that group. So again, great stuff from J-Mo. That said, Dwayne, I don't love when I have to buy a guy where it's like, okay, he's not really going to have this great of volume, so we just need him to be as like one of the most efficient receivers in the league. All right, so it was great to see from J-Mo. I was actually in on drafting him last year because he was a wide receiver 4 who we could talk through the early career suspension, injuries, things that held him back. Yep. But man, now we actually have to buy this dude as a low end wide receiver 2. I don't even think that ranking is necessarily egregious, but at the same time, man, have not made a habit of clicking his name so far in the round 4, round 5 area. What say you?
Yeah, and there's a lot of other names that we like that go around JMO, to your point. That's what's making it challenging for you right there. It's a very interesting spot in the draft. Technically with JMO, like this is year 4, we probably really call it year 3, right? Because that first year was really lost coming off the injury, the late season college injury as he came into the NFL draft. Obviously had the suspension. A lot of things didn't go right. But let's just say that this is like really, he's not a year 4, true year 4 player, more of a year 3 player. One thing we have to say, right, is that typically the breakouts, right, which are the guys that enter 16 plus fantasy points per game, if we're using that, because that typically means in a PPR league, you are a wide receiver 1 that season. They typically come in those first 3 to 4 seasons, and JMO's still in that. Now, he's not really proven that he could be this super high-end target earner, still sitting in an 18% target share if we isolate the games that he missed. If we look at his targets per route run, also sitting right there at 18%. To your point, Ian, really been more dependent on the big play. But it's not like it's just vertical shots down the field. I mean, they get him really involved in the stuff like these deep crossers where he catches it and then he can run. They'll get him in motion, do a lot of cool concepts. We'll see if that stuff all continues. I would imagine even with Ben Johnson gone, why would you really want to change a lot of those things? But I just bring all this up to say that, look, there is this chance that JMO does take this next step forward. The problem is that means that probably you got to really limit Sam LaPorta, or you got to steal part of that from Amon-Ra St. Brown. We have seen these offenses that can be just very consolidated around 2 guys, but really we have JMO and Sam LaPorta battling each other here. So one of them would have to win out over the other one in their ascension, and it's just hard to predict like which one would do it because they're both good young players. So I think that's what makes it tough. But we do love the fact that JMO lives in the Detroit offense. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for scoring fantasy points there. I already talked about it. My number 2 projected passing offense right now, if we look at the team level.
Do you think we should be paying a little more mind, though, to the loss of Ben Johnson? Because it does seem weird to me that we have, him leaving Detroit, Liam Cohen leaving Tampa Bay. And again, I see why we're saying it. Why would you change everything? But if these guys are so freaking good at their jobs, like, wouldn't that mean their teams are going to miss them here?
Well, I mean, if they've already laid the blueprint, though, then you can basically just follow that. I mean, it can come down to look, just knowing how to design plays and get something out of a play is one thing. But I think the real question comes down, do you know how to sequence plays? Do you know how to use plays early in the game to set up plays later in the game or in the middle in the game, or maybe it's on the next drive? There's always these cat and mouse games that are really going on. And some offensive coordinators truly are masterminds at that, right? They're just always knowing when to pull the right strings. That's the thing we won't know about an unproven play caller. They're going to probably run the same kind of plays, do a lot of the same schematic stuff. It will be a question of, do they know how to put that all together on game day based on what they're seeing from the opposing defense and really get the most out of the offense? So I think it's fair to your point. It is a question. I don't think it's something that we can just dismiss. The challenge is when you get to an offense like Detroit and you're like, well, we know Jared Goff has shown that he can do it. As far as supporting multiple weapons, we know that Amon-Ra St. Brown is an absolute beast. We know that Sam LaPorta is a good young ascending tight end. We know Jameson Williams can be this guy that can create these big plays. It's just when you have that much talent, it's kind of like you've talked about before, Jimmy's and Joe's over X's and O's. I don't know. I kind of lean towards the players on the field, making it tough for an offensive coordinator, but to be able to tank this too much. And we haven't even talked. We also have one of the best run games in the league, right? We just talked about David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the best offensive lines in the league as well. So there's just so many things rolling in the favor of the Lions.
New OC John Morton spent the last 2 years as Sean Payton's passing game coordinator in Denver. So certainly, a pretty good job to be holding down there, and was actually asked about changing the offense. Yeah, I
was totally hoping it would be old school Johnny Morton. If you guys were around back in the day, see Johnny Morton, I believe out of USC, that played for Detroit, had a flash in the pan, a couple of good fantasy seasons back in the day. It wasn't. It was just, sorry, John Morton, I like you too, but I was hoping it was Johnny Morton.
But hey, he was asked straight up, are you going to be changing Ben Johnson's offense? And I think his answer was something like, I'm not changing much. Why would I? So Morton certainly seems to be on the same page here. And again, at the end of the day, it's one of these things where, I could see the Lions falling off a little bit. But you know what? If they go from number one ranked scoring offense to number 3 or number 4, I still think there's going to be plenty of fantasy points to go around. So again, JMO, not someone who I've been actively attacking in fantasy. I think he hits the profile as a boomer bust wide receiver 3. Did finish wide receiver receiver 24 last year. On average, over the past decade, we've seen an average of 5 teams per year enable multiple top 24 wide receivers in the same offense. So, hey, it's on the table again. But again, for him to run so pure last season and finish as the wide receiver 24 just seems like a situation where we're buying a bit closer to that ceiling now than the floor like we were able to last year. You could say the opposite, though, is true for Sam LaPorta, Dwain, someone who, again, we were drafting as that overall tight end 1 last season. And yeah, wasn't great. All right. He did finish strong. We actually saw him average over 16 PPR points per game from weeks 15 to the divisional round. That said, from weeks 1 through 7, just 7.1. He was a tight end 22 during that stretch. And then the next 6 weeks, still only 11.3 fantasy points per game. So we can talk ourselves through some early season injuries. All right. This was an issue with hamstring and ankle issues. But where do you think LaPorta falls closer to in 2025, Dwain? The guy we saw as a rookie work as the tight end 1, or again, the more low-end tight end 1, a bit more inconsistent, that was on display last year?
Well, I don't know what a tidy one is, but yeah, sounds like something I wouldn't
we're
want to
working on
wear. But I would go like when I look at LaPorta, I think what we saw in the second half of last year once he was healthy. So basically, once we got to week 12, so I use my cut a little bit different than yours. You use the week 15. Essentially, I just look for when was he back in a full time role as far as his route participation, and over that stretch through the playoffs from week 12 on, he had an 87% route participation, which is absolutely elite for tight ends. When you get to 80%, we're feeling really good about it. He did an 8.6 utilization score. That is elite. He averaged 14 fantasy points per game, which is exactly what he scored in his rookie year. I think it was 13.9. So LaPorta really was back to his old self. You mentioned the injuries in training camp. He had the hamstring, then he injured his ankle in week 3, also dealt with a shoulder injury later in the season. But basically, once those things were cleared up, like he really got going. Now, a lot of times we put those two things together, Ian, and because it makes sense. It's like, okay, he was healthy. He did start playing. And then he started scoring fantasy points. Like, I feel pretty good about like linking those things together, but sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we think we see something that's not really there. It would make a lot of sense for that to be true. But there is a case where it's just like, no, he's a little more lost in the shuffle because of what Jameson Williams did last year. And now it's really more the two of them splitting up that other role versus the year before where it was more Sam LaPorta getting more of it. So last year he had an 18% targets per route run. The year before it was a 21% targets per route run. So I'm leaning more into LaPorta being this young ascending talent that we're now getting a discount on. I think the question ultimately comes down to the sites you're playing on. Again, Ian, like if you're playing on Underdog, again, a 3 wide receiver league. So that's another thing that's going to push JMO up. But JMO goes pick 43. Right. So before you get out of round 4, JMO's gone, but you get Sam LaPorta at pick 73. Right. So you're getting him in early round 7-ish. So even though it's a 3 wide receiver league, honestly, I lean towards LaPorta. Like I feel like these guys are going to be similar in targets, probably a slight edge in targets to LaPorta, more yards. I get the ceiling upside for Jameson as far as what yardage might look like. But man, that's a pretty big discount. Sleeper is similar because typically in sleeper leagues, you are starting 3 wide receivers. 63 right now is the average draft pick for JMO, and so that's round 6 versus round 8 for LaPorta. But then when you go to the 2 wide receiver leagues, ESPN and Yahoo, it flips. You're getting JMO in round 7, you got to take LaPorta in round 5. And then you're in Yahoo, it's round 6 for JMO, and then it's round 4 for LaPorta. So I do think like drafters in these sites are adjusting decently for the scoring not for the scoring form. Well, scoring format's one part of it, but your rosters and how many starters that you have to have. So I would say this though, on those leagues where you got to start 3 wide receivers, man, I like how far Sam LaPorta is getting pushed down. And I have, after our tight end episode, when you're like, yeah, but Dwain, are you ever really taking him? And I had asked my question. I was like, I'm not. So I started taking Sam LaPorta more since that show.
I will say, haven't completely gone on my way to get him. He is going kind of around those low-end RB2s and the still top 40, top 45 wide receivers before that cliff comes. But it is a situation where I'm kind of like you, where I do think I need to start back actively trying to draft the guy more because, again, what do we have here? The tight end 6 ever in terms of PPR points per game during their first 2 seasons. So I think we've already established that LaPorta is really good. We think the offense is really good. Is the tight end 4 price tag, again, kind of steep? Yeah, okay. But you know what? It's steep because the guy is a really good football player. So Sam LaPorta, again, all of our fantasy life rankers, tight end 4, someone who, again, we really pretty much expect to finish top 5. Don't let half a season of relative disappointment completely ruin the idea of investing in this young ascending talent still. So good stuff on all these guys, Dwain. now, though, we're going to close things out with a quick look at Jared Goff. And I just want you to take this one away because, again, I think you say a lot of smart things, Dwayne. I'll give you credit with that. But I think one of the best things you said this whole offseason is actually how low Jared Goff's best case upside scenario is. And I know you've been putting in a ton of work in the lab trying to, just make these perfect ceiling floor scenarios for fantasy life projections. So talk about Jared Goff and just how badly that lack of a rushing ceiling really impacts his ceiling scenario.
Yeah, it's a major factor. And if folks want to read, you can go over to fantasylife.com and you can check out the article for free, which I talk about the different quarterback profiles where we're combining really what we think of them as passers as well as what we think about them as rushers, because we too often talk about them as one or the other, right? And it's really the blend of those things. We're like, oh my God, Justin Fields can run for 55 yards per game. But okay, we also have to account for the fact that he's probably going to throw for 180. And so the same thing with Goff. And so when you look at him, Ian, a couple things first. Like, it's not like Goff is terrible. He's given you 19.2, 17.9, and 17.3 fantasy points over the last 3 years. That ranks 8th, 13th, and 15th. But I really do lean towards those 13th and 15th finishes. Number one, we have regression touchdowns per attempt. Last year, he had his major spike season. 6.9% of his passes went for touchdowns. The 2 years before, 5 and 4.9%. You could argue the JMO emergence did help with that. Also, yards per attempt, there was a spike, 8.6 versus 7.6 over the previous 2 seasons. So typically those things tend to come back down in line. And so when we look at the quarterbacks that can historically give us 22 points per game upside, you're like, oh, how'd you pick that arbitrary number? Because it represents a 20% point per game advantage over the low end QB1. So QB 10s to QB 12s in your fantasy leagues since 2011. And if we look at the most 2 likely buckets that Goff would fit in, the first one is 250 to 274 yards passing per game. I've got him projected for 260 and 0 to 9 rushing yards per game, right? I've got him at 5. You know how many quarterbacks since 2011 that were really good passers like that, but ran for 0 to 9 yards? How many of them finished out of 68? 68 quarterbacks have done this, Ian. How many of them reached that 22 plus fantasy points per game?
0.
1. You were slightly under, but you were very close. There was 1. Okay, let's say Jared Goff goes bananas as a passer, even better than what I have him at, the 260, which our logic does take into account. It's 1 of 33. And that would say if he threw for 275 to 299. Okay, so you're getting into that Joe Burrow territory at that point. But again, Burrow runs for more yards. So again, it's 1 in 33 and 1 in 68 of being a true difference maker. Now, does that make Jared Goff a bad pick in fantasy? No, it doesn't. But right now where he's going, like people are, I think, assuming a little bit too much about what happened last season. If you look at our ceiling and floor variance logic, Ian, the floor is 14.6. The median is 17.5, which is 18th best in the model. And his ceiling is 20.5 fantasy points per game, which is not bad, but that's 24th. And it really does all come back to that really low floor as a rusher. I do want to caveat, it's like if you're playing in best ball, you're trying to stack these weapons, and we want lions. So in those cases, I'm not saying don't take Jared Goff. And then all you're looking for are the single spike weeks where Goff can still give you these really big performances, and it can be, in correlation with the other lions that you have on your team. So not making this like a big best ball stand where I don't want Jared Goff, but in managed leagues, I probably won't be drafting that much Jared Goff at all this season.
And again, I think the point is just not to necessarily go out of your way for him, okay? Because right now on Sleeper and Yahoo, he's going off the board as a QB 8. ESPN, he's QB 17.
Too high.
Okay, like if we're not, QB 17 is fine. Like, yeah, if we're not forced to take this massive golf between him and similar archetypes like the Tua Tagovailoas, the Matthew Staffords of the world, yeah, I'm fine prioritizing Jared Goff there. I just can't exactly take him again over the guys who, yeah, maybe they can actually produce similar passing numbers, but again, the rushing potential is just so much higher there. So really was a great season from Goff. Like the guy we saw last year in terms of EPA per dropback, number 2 in the league and better than any of the Rams seasons in the past. But again, probably going to have some of that nasty regression coming for the touchdown total. And if I was going to say, Dwayne, anyone in the offense, if we had to say like who's the one guy who's probably going to suffer the most from no Ben Johnson, I do think some of that sky high efficiency from Goff. Because again, really has nowhere to go but down at this point. Not, trying to hate on the guy. It's been awesome to see his career revival in Detroit and everything. But yeah, just not something I'm completely going out of my way for in fantasy land. So takes us to the win total, Dwayne, sitting at 10.5, which I thought was a bit surprising. We actually see the Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, and Ravens as the only teams with an 11 11.5 win total. So I'm going to go ahead and take the over here. I know that the first place schedule isn't ideal, but you look at it and hey, more continued success on offense, which I think we most believe. And my God, the amount of injuries that this defense have, man, just absolutely brutal. So I do think we get more high-end success. Maybe they don't win 15 games again, but 10.5 feels reasonable to me. Give me the over. What say you snickering SOB?
Well, we just knew that you don't even have to say anything. We just know you take the over. Don't even say over. Just give the reasons, and everyone will know that you took the over. But I am with you.
I love everyone's
15,
team.
12 and 9 wins. 15, 12 and 9 wins. To your point, man, the defense was looking really good last year before it got just ravaged by injuries. They showed massive improvements against the pass. They can pass rush. Dude, they're loaded in their front 4 defensive tackles. They drafted another one in Tyleik Williams in round 1 this year. Like they're 4 deep at that spot. They can stop the run. They can pressure. They can cover. Man, they can run the ball. They can throw the ball. They can hit the big plays. They can get the crucial first downs when you just need to grind it out. They've just got such a good mix of complementary players really on both sides of the ball. The only thing that makes this tough at all, right, is not the loss of Ben Johnson. Like we have to count that in some. It's a tough division, man. I mean, you've got the Vikings, you've got the Green Bay Packers, we've got the Bears, who we're hoping is going to be a better team. Like you could argue this is the toughest division in football, and I think that's why the line sits at 10.5. But I'm with you. I think this is a very well-rounded team. Give me the over on the Lions on that 10.5 wins. And I actually feel pretty. This might be the one I felt the best about. I think I feel the best about calling this one.
This one is actually one that I will be putting some of my hard-earned American dollars on. So take that for what it's worth from someone who isn't exactly a gambling expert. But maybe this is our year, Dwain. We'll see what happens. Many more team previews coming either way here on the Fantasy Life Show. We appreciate you guys tuning in as always. For Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.